G'day and welcome to the November Relive Adelaide podcast. This month there's a bumper double episode to celebrate the lead up to the Adelaide 500 next month. That's right, there's only 24 days to go. For part one today, Adrian and I will be having a chat about some of the new announcements since the last podcast and also discussing a bit of the history around the Adelaide 500. Next Sunday we'll be back in part two to discuss the race being lost under the previous government. The previous government also selling off those Adelaide 500 taxpayer-owned assets, and of course the fantastic news due to a change of government that the race is coming back. Keeping with recording the podcast in the city near the Adelaide street circuit, we also had an exciting new location to record the podcast. Stick around to discover where that is. If you know the Adelaide street circuit and remember the days of the Adelaide Grand Prix, this is one location that you'll be very familiar with. Let's get into the news. So just a bit of recent news around the Adelaide 500. More bands have been announced for the event, and Adrian and I will be going through those very shortly. If you've been keeping an eye on the Relive Adelaide Facebook page, you'll see the progress pictures of the track build going up now. There was some talk yesterday, that's Friday the 4th of November, on Adelaide's 5AA breakfast show that the track build is a week behind schedule. The chairman of the SA Motorsport Board, Andrew Daniels, called in, and let's just have a quick listen to his reply.
Now, just off the back of our Breaking at 8, Andrew Daniels, in charge of the Adelaide 500, has called in. Morning to you, Andrew.
Yes, good morning. How are you?
Yeah.
We're good, Andrew. Hey, thanks for calling in, mate.
Pleasure.
Prefaced our Breaking at 8 by saying how much we love the V8s, but we have been contacted by someone who says there's a few logistical issues at the moment. What's your take on that?
Look, yes, there have been logistical issues. It's building the circuit has been a real challenge, as you would expect. Obviously, the time frames have been tight. The weather's been atrocious. I think we've had a almost like all of the challenges lined up against us. The team have done an absolutely brilliant job. We built in some time buffers, obviously, into the program, as you would expect, but then no one expected the amount of weather that's come in. Fortunately, I can assure you that the pit building now is basically all the structure is up and complete, and they're now doing the internal fit out, the steel work for a lot of the big grandstands, particularly big straight stand, is all up and done. So,
has it been behind schedule though? Because we've been told it has been behind.
It has slipped and then caught up again, and then slipped and then caught up again, and it will be a push all the way through to the finish to make sure. But I can absolutely assure you that it would all be done perfectly safely and on time for the event. And I have to really credit the team for what they've done. They've worked through some atrocious conditions.
Yeah, for sure. And doing it from a standing start, particularly with some of the infrastructure having been flogged off, has that caused a few issues?
Yeah, look, definitely. The having to get the infrastructure back, having a lot of new team members, new contractors who haven't worked on it before, so the learning curve has been just about vertical. I think, this is where Adelaide really and South Australians can really, excel. It's the old, we've got to do it because there's no choice. We will be delivering for South Australia, and so I'm really proud of what they're doing. But has it been tough to get to here? Absolutely.
Yeah, Andrew, thank you so much for calling us.
We appreciate you calling in.
Thank you for
and
clarifying.
As we said, we love the event. But
you'll be here in a month's time.
Yep, absolutely.
Thank you very much to Adelaide's 5AA for that audio. And just to wrap up the news around the Adelaide 500, also announced yesterday by the Adelaide 500 team is ex-Formula One driver and winner of the Australian Formula One Grand Prix in Melbourne in 2005, Giancarlo Fisichella will be racing at the Adelaide 500 in the S5000 Tasman Series. That's the V8-powered open-wheelers. It'll be great to have him here racing on the streets of Adelaide. There's a pretty action-packed events calendar in the precinct of the Adelaide Street Circuit to see the year. The Harvest Rock Festival is on Saturday and Sunday, the 19th and 20th of November in Rymel and King Rodney Parks. Tickets available, harvestrock.com. The Shannon's Adelaide Rally event finale is on in Victoria Park on Sunday, the 27th of November. That's a free event, but if you'd like more information, visit adelaiderally.com.au. And of course, the Velo Adelaide 500 is on from Thursday the 1st till Sunday the 4th of December. Tickets available at adelaide500.com.au. That's Adelaide, and then the numbers 500.com.au. And a new event that I've added onto the Relive Adelaide calendar, which will be in Rundle Park on Sunday, the 11th of December, is Vegan Picnic Let's Graze. From their Facebook event, Vegan Picnic is a smaller, food-focused event for the ever-growing vegan and vegan-curious community to celebrate and enjoy delectable local vegan food and drink from some of our favourite food trucks and retail outlets. It'll run from 11 a.m. till 5 p.m. Vegan Picnic is free to enter, but you need to BYO rug, chair, and of course your appetite. Gotta love those free events. So another free event in the city, that's in Rundle Park on the 11th of December. Vegan Picnic Let's Graze. Now let's get into the city and catch up with Adrian. We're in the city. We've moved up. The podcast has moved up, even though it's only one flight of stairs. We're moving up in the world. So if I look over my shoulder, I can look down towards Banana Bend. We're sitting on a balcony, and if I look straight ahead, we can see the brewery apartments, which are where the old malt towers used to be. Looking to the left is Rundle Road. Where are we, Adrian?
The Stag, the infamous Stag Corner is known then, and probably one of the best vantage points during the Grand Prix years. Obviously it's not used now for the Adelaide 500, which is on a shorter track, but this was really, one of those key corners on the Adelaide Grand Prix circuit.
Yeah. What was it like during the Adelaide Grand Prix? Obviously this was still part of the track. This was a spectator vantage point up here on the balcony?
Yeah, one of the prime spots, because when you look over the balcony, the tracks, you're basically on top of the track. You see them through 90-degree corner, and then you see them accelerate to what was known as sort of Brewery Bend. So it was a great spot, and you can see them coming from Banana Bend, so they carried good pace, they slowed down. And great place to be. I mean, this pub's been here forever, I think since the 1800s, so it's a great spot, and literally on the track.
Yeah. So Rundle Road was part of the track. Further down is Rundle Street. That was closed off, and that's where all of the merchandise could be purchased.
And the gates and things were there, and Rundle Street really became the sort of hub of social activity. So lots of merchandise stands and food stalls and things. So it's still closed off for some major events, but nowadays it doesn't really need to be for the Adelaide 500 when you think of the circuit footprints moved further in, I guess.
Yeah. So that's where we are. We're on the balcony of the Stag Hotel, and just like to thank the Stag Hotel for supporting the Relive Adelaide podcast. A few things that have happened since the last podcast, which we've previously discussed, which might be happening. So Michael Massey has joined the South Australian Motorsport Board and is also the chairman of the Supercars Commission. A great name to come aboard on the Motorsport Board is Michael Massey, former Formula One race director.
Yeah, and it's good he's going to hold those dual positions with the Supercars Commission and then the Adelaide, the South Australian Motorsport Board, because obviously there's going to be lots of ties in that. I think, Adelaide 500 coming back makes it sort of a marquee supercar event. It's locked in as the season finale, so it's good that the sort of those supercars connections are really built into the South Australian Motorsport Board, so then this really does become the cornerstone event of the board.
A few of the other board members were announced. So we've got previous Lord Mayor of Adelaide, Martin Hazy, Hurley Group hotelier Anna Hurley. Obviously, Andrew Daniels is heading up the SA Motorsport Board. There are a few comments on Facebook after the Motorsport Board was announced that these people, like Martin Hazy and Anna Hurley, aren't involved in motorsport. But I think with their connections, it's not only making it just like a motorsport event, it's actually going to grow and make it into an event which can bring in the hospitality. Obviously, Martin Hazy knows, a lot about the city and how things work. It sounds like the event's just that they want to take the event just to that next level.
Yeah, with these big government events, it's not just the sporting side; it's also the business, the tourism, the commercial, the concerts and all that. So it's sort of multi-dimensional, and that's where those board members come in and have different things. At the end of the day, the motorsport side of it almost takes care of itself, because it's supercars. They put on the cars and they put on the races and things. So it's more about the event itself, and you need those sort of big wig experts, if you like, with those sort of connections to make it all happen.
On the Bring Back the Adelaide 500 page, they had a drone shot showing the track beautifully resurfaced, obviously the temporary pit building being built. And I don't know whether it comes from, how the Liberals before the election were pushing the fact, the event costs money, the event costs money, the event costs money. If you say it enough, people will believe it. And, yes, the event does cost a lot of money to put on, but we've covered that off. There's a lot of economic benefit to the state. I think people now, though, are a little bit more, looking at that financial side of it, and they're seeing that temporary pit building up, because there are a lot of comments on there asking for a permanent facility to be built. Do you think the time, will come where we will have that permanent facility? Do you think the tide's changing as far as that public opinion?
I think it is, but I don't think it's happening in the right areas and the people who are going to make that decision. And I know from, having researched the Grand Prix history, if it didn't happen for the Grand Prix, it's unlikely to happen for the Adelaide 500. I think it's just the reality. And I think, the Adelaide 500's been around for long enough now that it should have justified itself to have that, and it hasn't. So I guess this sort of second incarnation of it remains to be seen. At least it's been around long enough to know the practice of how to make it all happen, build it up, where to store it, bring it down. I can't see it happening, probably not in my lifetime, but I guess we'll just have to see. But it works for what it is. It's a temporary solution. Yes, it's not ideal. It adds to the cost significantly, but then, the people who are against it would argue that there'd be another cost to have a permanent facility there. So it's a tough one, but I just can't see it happening, to be honest.
Yeah. The main topic that we're going to be discussing is how we got the Adelaide 500. So the first event was back in 1999, but just a couple of other things that I do want to cover off. So there's been some bands announced for the Sunday. So there'll be the Killers headlining the Sunday night at the Adelaide 500 this year. Amy Shark, and also Something for Kate will be performing as well. I was wanting to go on the Saturday night, but Sunday's looking very good as well, because Something for Kate, those old classics, Monsters, Three Dimensions, brings back a lot of memories, and just great names to get on board.
Yeah, and it's good that they're adding to the event. And I thought, when they announced sort of at the launch and announced the concerts and the support categories, I thought that would be it. But the fact that they're adding to it shows that they're sort of really, as we've seen, they're going the whole hog, and they're really sort of trying to bring back that old Adelaide 500 vibe where it's just a multi-dimensional event. So they're definitely not standing on their laurels. I think the Killers alone would have been a big enough Sunday concert, but to keep adding to it is pretty impressive.
Last podcast we spoke about the Aussie racing cars. So they're those miniature supercars, very fun to watch on track. Spoke about them, possibly coming back next year because they weren't on the bill, but since the last podcast, they've been announced, they're back, and fantastic.
Yeah, it's a great addition. They produce great racing, because of their size. They sort of, they can sort of really attack a street circuit. And again, it's, I didn't think they'd add any more, but they have, and that's a good sign. Their championship's already finished, so they're sort of doing like a little mini championship in the off-season. So good work by all involved to get it to happen, and it just adds another extra dimension and, more support categories, more on-track action, and, more value for money.
Yep. The on-track schedules have also been announced so far, so they're up on adelaide500.com.au. There's a few positions in there to be confirmed. I was asked also stadium trucks. So they're the stadium trucks, the ones where they put the jumps on the track and you see them slide out and got the huge body roll, and then they'll get the massive air. Are they coming back?
No, unlikely. They've sort of stalled a bit and sort of haven't really been seen for a while, so probably unlikely. They're a big hit when they first came here, and they were sort of became a bit of a headline act those last few years, but no, they've been sort of sidelined, which is a shame. It added something different, but they're still, operating in America, so we'll have to head over there to see them, I think.
It's So we mentioned the Aussie racing cars last podcast, and then since then they've returned, they're coming back. If you could mention a support category on the podcast and the SA Motorsport Board would pick it up and run with it and introduce it into the event, what support category would you like to see?
So if I think back to the Adelaide Grand Prix, the one that was the craziest was the supercarts.
Oh, yes.
Those, basically hotted up go-karts racing on a full Grand Prix track, which was concrete lined, which wasn't very safe back then, let's be honest. For, modern day standards, I don't think it would pass the test. That was insane. And obviously there are some big accidents, some famous ones and things. I mean, I'd love to see that. It's not happening in a million years, but that would be pretty cool. Because, I think the good thing about the Adelaide 500 is it's always had a strong support category, turning up, and that's back. When you think of Super 2 and S5000 and all that. I guess what's missing is the Porsche Carrera Cup, but they sort of have finished their season on the Gold Coast. So you can't really argue with it, but, it'd be nice to have... And I guess that's what the Stadium Super Trucks provided. It was just that one thing that was a bit different. So maybe they could bring something like that back, bring back a bit of a Grand Prix vibe with the supercarts. But as I said, I just don't think that would... In this day and age, it probably wouldn't pass the test.
Well, where we're actually looking at Banana Bend, so that was redeveloped when they put the O-Bahn running through Rymel Park, but probably the easiest way to explain Banana Bend, it's like a long sweeping chicane. So you come into it, you'll go left and then sweep right and then come up towards Rundle Street. I can't remember what year it was, but when the supercarts came into Banana Bend, pretty sure it was raining because I don't think it was oil on the track, but yeah, it was just a little bit damp. And the supercarts, Barbara Hepworth was leading in the supercarts, and she's come into this long sweeping chicane, turned left to come into, and the cart didn't even turn. So that's just understeered onward. She's gone smack bang into the concrete wall. Thankfully wasn't injured, and the carts behind her went in as well. I'm pretty sure one of them burst into flame, but... impressive for the time, but I'd just say safety standards, I can't see them coming back. Yeah.
I'm just daydreaming here, but I think from memory, I might be wrong, but I think it was 91.
Okay.
And I think that was the start of the rain that eventually cut short the actual Grand Prix. So again, it is crazy when you look back at the footage how that happened, but it was the 80s and 90s. A lot of stuff that happened back then we don't talk about nowadays. So.
I think they also had, speaking of go-karts at the Adelaide Grand Prix, and I know that we're sidetracking a little bit here, but we will come on to our main topic. Go-karts at the Adelaide Grand Prix, did they run a corporate go-kart where it was like one of those hire carts that you would get at Kartmania?
Yeah, pretty much. Basically CEOs and bigwigs, of different companies would race around the Adelaide Grand Prix track in a rental go-kart. Again, one of those crazy things which you probably can't get away with now, but... They
weren't the fastest things, though, were they?
No, they were dead slow, and it wasn't exactly exciting viewing for anyone who was sort of there to watch it. But it was just, another one of those things. There were fun runs and things, and I mean, the Adelaide 500 did that. I did it the final year, 2020. I did the run. You run 2 laps of the track on the Thursday, whatever it was. So they do stuff like that, which is good, and. It all adds up. It's, I remember I did it with a friend who wasn't going to the event and turned up for that. So they got his money out of it, so there's someone who isn't interested in the race. So, it's all those things that sort of help make it what it is.
Yeah. One of the support categories that I would like to see involved in the Adelaide 500 is actually drifting. Now, a lot of people have different opinions on drifting as far as the sport goes, but I think just, the spectacular that they do put, on track, sliding out close next to each other, lots of smoke going everywhere. They're very fun to watch. If I said what support categories would be introduced, I would probably say drifting, and it might happen, but let's wait and see to see what's announced.
Yeah, who knows? I think we've got to remember this is the restart of the event, so from here it should only get bigger and better, especially more time.
Yeah,
which they didn't really have much of this year, so hopefully it'll keep growing from there.
Fantastic. So we'll get into our main topic of how we got the Adelaide 500 and just those early years as well, and just explain what the Adelaide 500 is as far as an event goes. So Adelaide 500 started in 1999. What was it called? Did it come with major sponsorship or?
No, it's known as Sensational Adelaide 500 because Sensational Adelaide was the tagline for the city, if you like. I think, we've had a few different, SA Great and all that sort of stuff. It was basically that, so it didn't really have a title sponsor as such. I mean, it had lots of sort of little sponsors, but it was, started in 99. It was one of the offshoots of essentially when we lost the Grand Prix, there was a discussion of how do you replace the Grand Prix. And obviously a city like Adelaide, it's hard to replace such a grand event with something equivalent. The only equivalent would be if we hosted an Olympics or a World Cup or things, and let's be honest, Adelaide's not doing that. So the idea was to replace it with lots of little events, and Adelaide 500 was one of them. And obviously they had the know-how, they had the motorsport know-how, they had the track. It wasn't too far, off when we had the Grand Prix, so it just went from there. And I think they didn't know. It was interesting speaking to people, as part of my work and research. A lot of the feeling was, how do you replicate that Grand Prix scale? And sort of, there was that concern that people were going to be disappointed almost that it wasn't a Grand Prix, that it was like a poor imitation. But so what they did was essentially they ran it as if it was a Grand Prix. And that's why it really was of such a high standard when you compared it to other supercar events at the time.
So Andrew Daniels, who's on the SA Motorsport Board and organising the upcoming Adelaide 500, he was involved in the Adelaide 500 at the start?
He was there, and he's the one who told me, actually, just, there was that concern of, how, are people going to be disappointed? Are people going to be let down? Is it going to feel like a sort of, secondary, lesser event? But, that they treated it, and when you look at sort of the footage, and it's the same sort of, it's the same pit buildings, and sort of the grandstands look the same, and so it had that Grand Prix feel, obviously with a domestic touring car category, which is a bit different, and it's not going to have the international exposure, but it's still a big event. So that really carried through, and that sort of was almost a hallmark of the Adelaide 500, and that's why it really elevated supercar events, and that's the model that was then used, for Townsville and all these other places that now have their own sort of marquee street circuit events.
When the Adelaide 500 started in 1999, for this year, we've got two supercars events in SA. Did the Adelaide 500 back in 99 replace another event, or?
Malala was the South Australian supercar round, but it's not like there was sort of officially designated races per state. Okay. It just replaced it because obviously it was a bigger and better version of what they had. So Malala hosted before then, and then Adelaide 500 essentially replaced it, and it went from there, and then it became really the only South Australian round until the Bend comes along a lot later. And sort of only in the last few years. So it was really the sort of one race in South Australia.
So the initial contract ran for 5 years with the option to extend for another 5. Was it the Liberal government who introduced the
Yes, so
the
John
race?
Olsen was the Premier, and again, it was part of that sort of feeling of, how do we get sort of major events into the state? We'd spoken about the equestrian and the Tour Down Under and all those sort of events, so this is part of it. And it went from there, and also what we know now as supercars, as V8 supercars back then, was sort of in a period of growth. They had a new commercial TV deal with Channel 10. Bathurst became part of the championship. It wasn't part of the championship before 99. It sort of got included. So it was this sort of attempt to really boost the championship, make it, if you think back then, it was really Bathurst was the major event and the championship played second fiddle. So it was a feeling of trying to sort of build it up with marquee events. So this was part of it, and it worked so well for them because they could carry that sort of Grand Prix momentum.
So the Liberals bought it in with John Olsen, then it got cancelled with the Liberals. It's now been bought back by Labor. It seems to be this continual, motorsport hot potato where, depending on who's in government, why is it like that?
It's hard to explain, and that's why, when people say, it's Liberals and Labor, it's not necessarily that simple, that it's sort of black and white. I mean, when you think of, we'll get onto it soon, but the government that cancelled the Motorsport Board was the Labor government. So
that's true.
It's hard to pinpoint. I think it gets caught up in governments and political movements and things. It goes back to the Victoria Park build, the fact that it's a temporary facility. You butt up against the city council, so then it depends on who's on the council. So there's so many factors. So I don't think it's as black and white as one hates the, one more than the other. It's just it's a shame, but it's common around the world, and you see, and that's why street circuits come and go, and that's why the rare ones that hang around like Monaco are often, essentially those countries that rule themselves.
That's true.
So it's a shame, but I think as we said, at the very start, having temporary facilities makes it that much harder.
Yeah. So the first race was in 1999, running on a shorter circuit compared to the Adelaide Grand Prix. I know that you've covered it off in previous podcasts. Just for new listeners, why the move to that shorter track?
Basically because of how much slower they are than an F1 car. So if you think of a supercar going around compared to a Formula 1 car, it's a lot slower. So if you're sitting in the main grandstand, you're going to see it a lot less. So the idea was cut the circuit, and therefore the lap times are about equivalent. So if you're a fan of the grandstand, you'll see the cars as much as as you would with an F1. Also for traffic disruption. So having Rundle Street closed off and this sort of East Terrace, Banana Bend section, it just disrupted city traffic a lot. By moving it sort of further away, you kept this side of the city open. And that became a big factor later on when Fringe was run at the same time. So it just sort of helped with traffic, helped with lap times, helped with cost, helped with the build. So just all those factors. And their thinking as well was it's going to be a smaller event, so we need a smaller footprint. We're not going to be having as many people. There was the argument later on that, well, we're getting hundreds of thousands of people, we should have the full circuit. But again, it's the lap time just increases, and then it's not as much of a sell for people sitting in the grandstand.
Yeah. Banana Bend, obviously running past his Stag Hotel, down Rundle Road, right onto Decateville Terrace, and then that huge main long straight would be great. But yeah, just as we've been sitting here, I don't know whether it's going to, you'll be able to hear it on the podcast, whether they're Volvo engines running in those buses. But yeah, lots of buses going past and traffic, it would just cause absolute chaos.
Yeah, and we've got to remember, they didn't think it'd be the success that it became. So the idea was to sort of do it and almost see how it goes, but then it sort of exceeded expectation. But the reality is, you're still disrupting traffic, and that's always an ongoing thing. You had to keep costs down. You had to keep the city going. So it's, I think they did the right thing. It's a shame, obviously, because, for the Stag, I'm sure they would have preferred the full circuit. Banana Bend's a classic corner that we've lost, and Decateville Terrace, the straight isn't as long, but the Adelaide 500 circuit has its own characteristics. Turn 8 became a key corner, and that didn't exist on the Grand Prix circuit. So I think they did a good job, and it definitely creates a sort of bull ring type circuit that has produced pretty good racing.
Yeah. So we all know the Bathurst 1000, so it's 1000 because of 1,000 kilometres. So the Adelaide 500, it's a 500-kilometre race, is that right?
So the format was 250k races, one 250k race on Saturday and then one on Sunday. So that's where the 500 comes from. It's a sort of common thing in supercars, Australian touring cars. Back in the day, you'd have your Sandown 500s or your Oran Park 300s. It's just the way they've done it. I guess it stems from the Bathurst 1000. So, and the idea obviously was split it across 2 days. So you didn't have really that sort of, obviously with the Grand Prix, it's all about the Sunday. So again, they sort of were thinking it sort of would boost the weekend attendance if you had it over sort of 2 days, and then it differentiates it from other races and things. And that's a format that's pretty much universal now, apart from Bathurst still, which is obviously the one big race. Yeah.
When the first event happened in 1999, was the plan to actually split that 500 kilometres? So rather than doing a 250-kilometre race, have your winner on the Saturday and then do another 250 kilometres on the Sunday and have a winner of that? Was the plan to race the 250 kilometres, stop, have a break overnight, and then continue on the next day?
Yeah, absolutely. As crazy as that sounds, as you explaining it, I just thought that just is ridiculous. But that was actually the original format. And then inevitably what happened was by the Saturday, some of the key drivers pulled out, withdrew, retired, whatever. And then they realised, well, if you had a ticket for the Sunday and you want to see Dick Johnson, and is already retired, you might not turn up. So the rules were hastily changed on Saturday night, as only motorsport can do, and it sort of they were back in the race. So the format sort of tinkered over the years. Some years it was almost like where you finished the Saturday was where you started the Sunday.
Okay.
Then later on it became they had individual qualifying sessions and all this thing. Essentially now they're two different races.
Yeah.
So you'll get one qualifying session for each. You'll get championship points for each. You might finish first in race one, and then you might finish last in race two. So strange format. The attrition rate was higher than they thought, and there was lots of cars retiring, hitting walls, a lot of dehydration at the time.
Yep.
Drivers weren't used to racing for that long, solo, heat, street circuit, which wasn't as common back then for touring cars. So lots of factors, and then that rule went. They still like to have like a round or an event winner, so you can say you won the Adelaide 500. In previous years, it was the driver who had the most points across the two races or an aggregate. Nowadays, I think it's just, previous to the cancellation, it's just the Sunday winner is the winner of the Adelaide 500, which, again, you might feel ripped off if you won the Saturday race, but it's just one of those technicalities which happens, which is, as we've seen with F1, with sprint races and things, this is the problem. You introduce more races, the simplicity of it all goes. So, as someone who makes a living from trying to explain this to people, it's not, I can assure you, it's not easy.
So the Adelaide 500, because it's two 250-kilometre races, one on the Saturday, one on the Sunday. I've always followed it sort of in the background. I haven't necessarily always followed supercars, but I think I did get confused a couple of years because it was called the Adelaide 500, but they were running like 225-kilometre races?
Yes.
Did that happen? Or?
Yes, so for a few years they ran 225-kilometre races on the Saturday, and then the main, or a 250k race on the Sunday.
Okay.
So still 500 in total.
Yeah, right.
But the Saturday was diminished because you had these two sprint races. And again, it just, I think almost if you look at the history of the event, that's a partial decline started there, because you shouldn't tinker with formats that worked. And the 250k race format worked. And, it's good that they've obviously brought it back after a few years. But yeah, it was confusing. It didn't really work. I think it confused the audience, and simplicity is best.
Yeah. Was it big, you said obviously Andrew Daniels was talking about there being worry on whether people would compare it to the Adelaide Grand Prix and then rock up and be disappointed, but was it a big boom right from the start?
Yeah, pretty much. It was well attended and sort of, got rave reviews from the drivers. The racing was good. It was a success right away, and that's where the commercial interest then comes in from the following year, and the crowds start coming in, the concerts keep getting bigger, and it really that carried over for a fair few years. If you sort of pinpoint the decline, it's not for probably over a decade since. So I think it just worked, and it sort of had that 4-day format. Obviously, they tinkered with it. The concerts sort of some years were great, some years were less so, but it seemed to work. And again, we've credited in previous podcasts the success of the Grand Prix board in running the Grand Prix. It's the Motorsport board who ran the Adelaide 500, and they did a great job. Yeah.
So it started in 99. The last one was, wowee, if that doesn't show up on the podcast, I don't know what we. We've just had a nice Harley Davidson head past down Rundle Street. Good night out for riding, though, got to say. So the first race was in 1999. The last one was in 2020. So there were 22 events all up. Were the concerts there from day one?
Yes, that was a carryover from the Grand Prix. Basically, same sort of template, racing during the day, concerts at night. I think on the first year it might have been, Saturday or Sunday or Friday to Sunday, but then, it became every night and different sort of music types on each night and things, and Sunday would be the big headline act. There was one year they didn't do a Sunday concert because there was a festival fringe opening that night, or sort of a festival fringe concert, which they were sort of hoping people would go to that. That didn't go down well. Just, again, that was one of those points where it was getting a bit... They were losing sight of what the event was and losing sight of its place and its need to have sort of clean space, and that's where the Fringe Festival rivalry started coming in.
Is that where... Sorry to interrupt, but is that when the Tourism Commission was in charge?
It was around then, yes. It was when the sort of government became heavily involved and it was trying to sort of marry up its events within that sort of Mad March time period. I don't think it was that year, but it was around that time when there was the Friday Night Festival opening, which is an outdoor open concert, orchestra and all that, sort of famous composer from overseas, and across town at Adelaide 500 they had like a GT night race or a GT or Porsche night race, and that was drowning out the concert, across the city. Things like that didn't need to happen, and that really left a bit of a bitter taste. And so just things like that, which were hopefully we avoid now with the new date in December. I don't think there's much else on, unless they throw a Christmas pageant in there, who knows. But it's those things. That's where it started losing its way, because it lost its place. Like we said with the Grand Prix, it worked because it was a major event within the city, and it was sort of uncontested, if you like. And if you're going to have more major events the size of a city like this, you need to really spread them out, because the CBD is only that big. So hopefully they sort of have learnt from history, and I think the people involved should be doing that.
Yeah. If it was a boom from the first event and it ran for 22 events, did they bag any trophies to put in the cabinet?
Yeah, it was inducted in the Supercars Hall of Fame, promoter of the year. It was, it became the sort of marquee event. It started the season most of those times. It didn't start as a season opener, but it became the season opener pretty soon after. Some years it wasn't, but it sort of, it slotted into that sort of start of the season vibe. So there's always, car launches and associated things. It was a great success. I mean, there were some issues some years with weather, heat, rain, as I said, clashes with other events. But, overall it worked. It just needed to find its spot. I think in later years it sort of started losing ground when it was being encroached on by Fringe. If you think of where we're sort of sitting at the Stag, across the road is where the Fringe Gardens are. They sort of kept expanding, which sort of went towards where the track is. I remember the year 2020 when I did the fun run and I actually ran the track, because obviously as media we don't really get to get on the track as such. I remember running down that section. I could hear the Fringe performers, and it was the sort of realisation that, well, this is, it's right here, it's right on the doorstep. You've got a car race on one side of the road, and then on the other you've got all these sort of Fringe performers, and it was just that realisation of how is this meant to work, and I think we saw the effects of that.
So in 2020, it was known as Mad March because you had Fringe on, you had the Adelaide 500 on. Now with the date change and the event being in December, which there's not much time left. Are they all on track?
Getting there. Obviously it was so late in the day with the election and things, but it seems to be happening, and I think at this stage there's no going back. It's happening. Obviously we don't know the size and scale of it. It might not be to the size and scale of previous Adelaide 500s, but I think it'll still be big enough to justify it. I mean, like we were saying, the support categories and the concerts and things, it's sort of, they're big names, so you'd want to be able to accommodate people who'd want to see all that. So I think it's happening. I guess the only concern one of the concerns I can think of is, the amount of rain we've had, and sort of it's not really doesn't look like it's going to be a traditional summer, so hopefully, the weather plays ball. But yeah, we'll see. Seems like the resurfacing is going ahead, the track build's happening, the grandstands are going up, the pit building's going up. It's pretty impressive.
Yeah, always exciting to see, all of the build happening coming up to the event. Next podcast, we're just going to talk about how we lost the Adelaide 500, or basically how it was cancelled. COVID was used as a little bit of an excuse, but there was also more to it as well. In 2020, crowd numbers were down to 206,000 for the event, down from 254,000 the year before, so there was a huge drop in numbers. But now with the Adelaide, with the SA Motorsport Board back, the event coming up away from that Fringe time, it's going to be a great event. Another great podcast. Adrian, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.
Well, that's it for part 1 of this month's podcast. Join Adrian and I next Sunday for part 2. I look forward to joining you then. Have a great week, and as always, keep smiling, and bye for now.